Beneath one of the largest dams on Earth, the water has been digging a hole. Not a crack, a hole. The concrete inside would still be cooling 125 years later. There is a structure in central China so massive that building it changed how fast our planet spins. It weighs around 36,000 tons. Engineers did the math, and the answer was terrifying. If you poured the Hoover Dam the way you'd pour a sidewalk, all at once, the concrete inside would still be cooling 125 years later, and long before then, it would tear itself apart. Not from the weight of the water, not from an earthquake, from its own heat. The Hoover Dam should have been impossible to build. So how is it still standing, almost a century later? To understand the problem, you have to stand where they started. Black Canyon, on the Colorado River, right on the border of Nevada and Arizona. A narrow gap of black rock with a wild river tearing through the bottom of it. It was the middle of the Great Depression. Thousands of desperate men drove into the desert looking for work, sleeping in tents in heat that could pass 120 degrees. The government even built a whole town, Boulder City, just to house them. But before anyone could pour a single bucket of concrete, they had a bigger problem. You cannot build a dam in a river that is still flowing. So the first job wasn't building, it was making a river disappear. Their answer was brute force on an unimaginable scale. They bored 4 enormous tunnels straight through the solid walls of the canyon, each one 56 feet across, wide enough to swallow a 4-lane highway. Then they forced the entire Colorado River through them, around the work site. With the canyon floor finally dry, the real construction began, and it was the largest concrete structure humanity had ever attempted. Over 3 million cubic yards of it, enough to build a road stretching clear across the country. But that mountain of concrete hid a secret enemy. Here's what almost nobody realizes about concrete. It doesn't dry, it cures. When cement and water mix, they trigger a chemical reaction, and that reaction gives off heat. In a thin sidewalk, the heat escapes into the air, and you never notice it. But the Hoover Dam is not thin. At its base, it is more than 600 feet thick, a solid wall of rock-hard concrete taller than a skyscraper laid on its side. Deep in the center of that mass, the heat would have nowhere to go. So the engineers ran the numbers, and that's where they got the nightmare figure. Poured as one giant block, the core of the dam would trap so much heat that it would take 125 years to cool down to the temperature of the canyon around it. And a cooling object shrinks. As the outside cooled and the inside stayed hot, the concrete would pull against itself with enormous force. It would crack, it would crumble. A finished dam, holding back the largest reservoir in America, quietly destroying itself from the inside out. So what do? The first idea was elegant. Don't pour one giant block at all. Instead, build the dam out of hundreds of separate columns, interlocking towers of concrete, each one poured in thin layers, just 5 feet deep at a time. Smaller pieces mean less trapped heat, and more surface for that heat to escape. But even that wasn't enough. The columns were still cooling far too slowly. They needed to reach inside the concrete and pull the heat out actively. They needed to refrigerate the dam, and that is exactly what they did. As each 5-foot layer was poured, workers laid down a grid of thin steel pipe inside it, 1 inch across, looping back and forth through the wet concrete. When you add it all up, they buried around 582 miles of pipe inside the Hoover Dam. Then they pumped water through it. At first, cold water straight from the river, carrying the worst of the heat away. But to finish the job, they built a refrigeration plant right there on the site. An ice factory capable of producing 1,000 tons of ice every single day. Chilled water from that plant flowed through the hidden pipes, drawing the last of the heat out of the concrete from the inside. They were, quite literally, freezing the dam solid on a schedule. A job that nature would have taken a century and a quarter to do was finished in under 2 years. By March of 1935, the artificial cooling was complete. But now, the dam was full of hundreds of separate columns with thin gaps between them. So the crews pumped a cement grout into every joint, gluing the towers into one seamless, monolithic wall of concrete. Only then was it truly a single dam. None of this came cheap, and I don't just mean money. Building in that heat, dangling from cliffs, blasting tunnels through rock. It killed people. 96 workers died in industrial accidents during construction. Every foot of that dam was earned. But when it was done, they had built something that still stuns engineers today. A wall of concrete 726 feet high. And it doesn't hold the water back by brute strength alone. It's curved. The arch shape pushes the immense pressure of the reservoir sideways into the solid walls of the canyon itself. The rock helps hold the river. Behind it rose Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, stretching more than 100 miles up the canyon. And inside the dam, 17 giant turbines began to spin, turning the weight of falling water into more than 2,000 megawatts of electricity, power for millions of homes. Think about what that generation actually pulled off. In the middle of the worst economic collapse in modern history, with slide rules and hand calculations, they identified a problem invisible to the naked eye: heat, buried in stone. And they solved it by inventing a way to air-condition a mountain of concrete. The Hoover Dam should have cracked itself apart. It should have taken 125 years just to cool. Instead, it became one of the most reliable structures ever built. Because a group of engineers refused to accept that impossible was the final answer. But Hoover isn't even the most extreme dam ever attempted. Somewhere out there, engineers built a dam so massive it slightly changed the speed of the Earth's rotation. That's the next story. We'll see you there. There is a structure in central China so massive that building it changed how fast our planet spins. That is not a metaphor. NASA ran the numbers, and the answer was real. This one dam made every day on Earth very slightly longer. It sounds impossible. How can anything humans build push back against the rotation of an entire planet? To understand that, you have to understand just how big this thing really is. This is the Three Gorges Dam, stretched across the Yangtze, the longest river in Asia. It is a wall of concrete more than 2,300 meters long and about 185 meters tall. It holds back a reservoir that stretches some 600 kilometers upstream. To build it, engineers poured more than 27 million cubic meters of concrete. It is the largest power station on the face of the Earth, capable of producing 22,500 megawatts of electricity. But raw size is not what makes it unbelievable. Here is the part that sounds like science fiction. When they filled that reservoir, they lifted around 40 cubic kilometers of water high above sea level and held it there. And when you move that much mass that far, the planet notices. Think of a figure skater spinning on the ice. When she pulls her arms in, she spins faster. When she stretches them out, she slows down. The Earth works the same way. Spread mass outward and upward, and the whole planet's spin eases, just a little. That is exactly what the reservoir did. By raising all that water, the dam increased the Earth's moment of inertia, the planet's resistance to spinning. According to NASA scientists, it slowed our rotation just enough to make each day longer by about 6/100ths of a microsecond. It is a mind-bending number, but tiny. You will never feel it. NASA also calculated the mass shift nudged the position of the poles by about 2 centimeters and made the Earth a fraction rounder around the middle. So why build something with that kind of reach? The answer is a river that killed for centuries. The Yangtze is beautiful, but it has a violent history. For hundreds of years, its floods drowned farmland and swept away entire towns, killing enormous numbers of people. Taming those floods was the dream behind this dam, long before anyone worried about turbines or rotation. So in 1994, construction officially began, and the scale of the project was almost hard to comprehend. To let the river keep flowing while they worked, engineers diverted the Yangtze, then raised a concrete barrier across one of the great rivers of the world. Inside that barrier, they installed 32 enormous main turbines, each one capable of producing 700 megawatts, plus 2 more generators on top of that. When the last of them came online in 2212, the dam reached its full, staggering capacity. In a single record-breaking year, it generated almost 112 terawatt-hours of electricity. That is enough to power tens of millions of homes from a single structure sitting across one river. But this power came at a staggering human price. To make room for the rising reservoir, the water had to swallow the land behind the dam. Whole cities, towns, and villages were flooded. At least 1.3 million people were forced to leave their homes, relocated so the valley could disappear beneath the water. And it was not only people. As the reservoir filled, it drowned countless archaeological and historic sites, some of them thousands of years old. An entire landscape of human history vanished under the new lake. The cost was not only measured in money or concrete. There were physical consequences too. The immense weight of all that trapped water pressing down on the land has been linked to more frequent landslides along the reservoir's edges and even to increased seismic activity in the region. Reshaping a river at this scale does not come free, and yet standing at the dam, it is hard not to be amazed by what it does every single day. Ships do not just stop at this wall, they climb it. A series of giant locks lift and lower vessels step by step, and a colossal ship lift can raise an entire boat in a water-filled basin like an elevator for the river. So think about everything this one structure touches. It controls the floods of an ancient, deadly river. It powers a huge slice of a nation. It rerouted the lives of more than 1 million people. And in doing all of that, it reached up and gave the entire planet the faintest tap on the brakes. The Three Gorges Dam is a reminder of something both thrilling and unsettling. We have become powerful enough to reshape rivers, move mountains of water, and leave a fingerprint on the spin of the earth itself. The only question left is how carefully we choose to use that power. But changing the planet's rotation is not the only impossible-sounding feat in modern engineering. Beneath one of the largest dams on Earth, the water has been digging a hole. Not a crack, a hole. Over about 50 years, the river carved a pit into the solid rock at the base of the dam, at least 90 meters deep, eating its way toward the foundations. Engineers warned that if the dam ever gave way, more than 500,000 people could die. This is the Kariba Dam, and the local people always said the river would try to destroy it. The Kariba Dam sits on the Zambezi, the great river on the border between what is now Zambia and Zimbabwe. It was meant to be a triumph, tame Africa's wildest river, power 2 nations. But the people who had lived on that river for centuries believed something was down there, and they said it would never allow the dam to stand. In the 1950s, engineers looked at the Zambezi and saw raw power going to waste. The plan was enormous. They would throw a wall of concrete across the Kariba Gorge, a curved arch dam 128 meters tall and nearly 600 meters wide. Construction began in 1956. Behind that wall, the river would back up into a lake. But not just any lake. Lake Kariba would become the largest man-made reservoir on the planet by volume, holding around 185 cubic kilometers of water, stretching about 280 kilometers from end to end. It was less like a reservoir and more like an inland sea conjured out of a river valley. Around 7,000 workers came to build it. Whole towns were raised in the bush to house them, along with an airstrip, deep in a remote gorge. On paper, Kariba was exactly the kind of project that was supposed to announce a modern, electrified future for the region. But the river had other ideas, and so, according to the people who knew it best, did something living inside it. The Tonga people had lived along the Zambezi for generations, and they believed the river was home to a god named Nyamnyami, a serpent-like spirit of the water. When they heard that engineers were going to wall up the gorge, the warning was clear. Nyamnyami would not stand for it. The river would rise up and tear the dam away, and then twice. It very nearly did. In 1957, while the dam was still going up, the Zambezi flooded on a scale the engineers had not planned for. Then, in 1958, it happened again. An even bigger flood, the kind that was supposed to come once in 1,000 years, arriving back to back. The water smashed through the works and undid months of labor. To the builders, it was a freak of weather. To the Tonga, it was proof. The river was fighting back. The dam was finished in 1959, but the true cost came on 3 fronts. The first was human. Building Kariba killed 86 workers on a single day in February 1959. A platform inside a shaft to the power station gave way and 17 men fell to their deaths at once. Some of the dead were sealed into the concrete where they fell. The second front fell on people who never asked for the dam at all. As the new lake began to swallow the valley, it drowned the ancestral home of the Tonga. Reporting puts the number forced to move at around 57,000 people cleared out of the Gwembe Valley to make way for the water. Many were resettled onto poorer land, and many say they were never properly compensated. As the lake rose, a separate rescue, called Operation Noah, scrambled to lift thousands of stranded wild animals out of the flooding bush. But the third front is the one that turned Kariba into a slow-motion emergency. And it is pure physics. When the dam releases water, it fires it out through spillway gates in a colossal jet, straight down into the gorge below. Year after year, decade after decade, that jet hammered the riverbed at the foot of the dam, and it began to dig. The plunging water scoured out the solid rock and carved a vast pit, a plunge pool, at the base of the wall. Over the years, it grew to at least 90 meters deep, and it kept creeping backward toward the dam's own foundations. This is the nightmare for any dam. Not a crack in the wall, but the ground beneath it being quietly eaten away. Engineers spelled out what a failure would mean: a wall of water racing down the Zambezi. Potentially more than 500,000 people killed. Nearly 3 million affected. And downstream, another great dam, Cahora Bassa, likely destroyed in the same surge. The river, it seemed, was still trying to win. So in the last few years, a race began to save it. It is called the Kariba Dam Rehabilitation Project, and its most important job was to fix that hole. Engineers carefully reshaped the plunge pool, reshaping the rock so the falling water would stop clawing back toward the foundations. That work reached completion, and the pool was refilled in August of 2024. With it done, the risk of the dam being undermined is now considered, in the engineers' words, mitigated. The spillway gates are being refurbished, and the wider project was expected to wrap up around the end of 2025. So, Kariba still stands. It still powers millions of homes across 2 nations. But it would be a mistake to say the river was ever really tamed. Because, in recent years, the danger flipped. Severe droughts dropped Lake Kariba so low that the dam could barely generate electricity at all, plunging both countries into long blackouts. First, the river threatened to destroy the dam with too much water. Now it threatens it with too little. Kariba is a monument to enormous ambition, and to everything that ambition overlooked. The workers sealed in its concrete. The tens of thousands of Tonga who lost their valley and were told it was progress. And a river that, for over 60 years, has never really stopped pushing back against the wall in its throat. The engineers say the foundations are safe now. Nyami, the story goes, is still down there. So the question Kariba leaves us with is a simple one. When you dam a river this size, do you ever truly beat it? Or do you just hold it back and hope for as long as the concrete lasts? Over the ruins of the worst nuclear accident in history sits the largest moving object humans have ever built. It weighs around 36,000 tons. It is taller than the Statue of Liberty. And it was built to do one job: seal the Chernobyl reactor away from the world for 100 years. It was finished in 2016. In 2025, a single drone put a hole in it. This is the story of a structure designed to outlast us all, and how quickly that promise came apart. It is called the New Safe Confinement, and it was meant to be the final chapter of Chernobyl, not a patch, not a temporary fix. 100-year answer to a disaster that will stay deadly for far longer. This is how it was built, and how that guarantee was broken. To understand the arch, you have to understand what it was covering. In 1986, reactor number 4 at Chernobyl exploded and burned, scattering radioactive material across Europe. In the months after, crews built a crude concrete shell around the wreckage, thrown up at desperate speed. People called it the sarcophagus. It was never meant to last. And by the 2000s, it was cracking, leaking, and at real risk of collapse. So the world came together to build something better. The plan was staggering. A single enormous arch, tall enough to swallow the entire reactor building whole. When it was done, it measured 257 meters across and rose 108 meters into the air, big enough to fit a cathedral inside, with room to spare. And there was a clever, almost sneaky piece of engineering behind it. You cannot ask people to work directly above an exposed reactor for long. The radiation is too dangerous. So they did not build the arch over the reactor at all. They built it to one side, in a cleaner area, where crews could work in relative safety. Then, once it was finished, they slid the whole thing into position. Think about that. 36,000 tons of steel moved sideways over 300 meters, using a system of 224 hydraulic jacks that pushed it forward in tiny, careful strokes. In November 2016, over about 2 weeks, the largest land structure ever moved by humans crept into place over the dead reactor and sealed it in. Inside, engineers hung giant remote-controlled cranes so that one day the old crumbling sarcophagus could be taken apart from a safe distance. The whole project cost somewhere around 2 billion euros, paid for by more than 40 countries. It was designed to hold for at least a century. For nearly a decade, it did exactly what it was supposed to. The arch stood over Chernobyl, quietly doing the most important job on the site. And then, on the 14th of February 2025, that job was interrupted in a way no one had planned for. A drone struck the roof of the confinement and started a fire. Ukraine said the drone was Russian. Russia denied it. But the damage itself was not in dispute. And here, the problems arrived on 3 fronts. The first was the physical damage. The drone and the fire tore through the outer and inner skin of the arch, ruining around 200 square meters of panels, along with systems that keep the inside dry and controlled. Remember, this was not just a roof. It was a sealed, climate-controlled shell, engineered to stop water and air from reaching the reactor. And now it had a wound in it. The second front was what that wound meant. According to the International Nuclear Watchdog, the confinement had lost its primary safety functions. In plain terms, the structure that was built to contain Chernobyl could, for a time, no longer fully do so. The radioactive material inside was still trapped by the older barriers beneath. But the 100-year guarantee, the whole point of the arch, was gone. The third front is the hardest one. Fixing it. You cannot simply send workers up a ladder to patch a hole here. Every repair happens in a contaminated zone, in the middle of a war, on a structure so complex that few things about it are simple. Officials have said that restoring the arch to full function could take another 3 to 4 years and cost at least 500 million euros on top of everything already spent. And, as of 2026, reports suggest that work has been slow and stop-start, with engineers worried about moisture creeping into a structure that was supposed to stay perfectly dry for a lifetime. There is a deeper irony here, too. The arch was designed to defend against almost everything: corrosion, earthquakes, tornadoes, a century of harsh weather. It was built to outlast the people who made it. But it was never designed for the one thing that actually hit it. Because when engineers plan a structure to last 100 years, they plan for nature. They do not usually plan for war. So where does that leave Chernobyl today? The arch is still standing. It is still, for the most part, doing its job, holding the line over the reactor with the help of the barriers underneath. Radiation levels outside have stayed stable. This is not a second disaster. But the confidence is broken. A structure that was meant to be sealed and forgotten for 100 years now needs constant attention, expensive repairs, and a plan for a future no one can promise. The dismantling of the old sarcophagus, the reason the arch existed in the first place, has been pushed further out of reach. And that is the strange, uncomfortable lesson of the new safe confinement. We can build things of almost unimaginable ambition. A 100-year shield, the largest moving structure in history, funded by nations that agree on almost nothing else, all to protect the future from a mistake in the past. And yet the safety of even our greatest structures does not really depend on the steel. It depends on the world staying calm enough to leave them alone. So maybe the real question Chernobyl leaves us with is this: what is the point of building something to last a century if the century refuses to cooperate? If this blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more megastructures. And tell me in the comments which one I should cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.